I'm Johnny Diamond, and welcome to BBC World Questions. France is an economic powerhouse, a leader in Europe, but now in deep political turmoil. We have leading politicians answering questions from across the country. Snap elections called by the French President Emmanuel Macron earlier this year led to a minority government, and the president's political credibility is now weakened. His party is now unable to pass laws without the support of rival blocs, and the road ahead looks increasingly tough. He wants spending cuts and tax hikes to cut public sector jobs and to make the French work longer before they pick up their pensions. His opponents on the left, who came together and won the most seats in the elections, say they will fight all austerity plans. Then there's the rise of the populist right. Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party won more seats than ever before, and it is now the third largest bloc in the Assembly. They're arguing for tougher immigration laws. And Europe's foreign policy is now in the spotlight after Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential election. We'll discuss the possible impact on France. Joining me to take questions on all the big issues are my distinguished panel. Eleanor Carrois is a deputy in the National Assembly representing the President's Party, Renaissance. Fabrice Leggeri is an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, representing Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party. Danielle Obono is a deputy in the National Assembly representing the left-wing France Unbowed party. And finally, Florence Fauchet is a professor of political science at the prestigious Sciences Po University. Welcome to you all. Let's go straight to our first question. It comes from Mehdi. Mehdi.
Hello everyone. I'm Mehdi, a 25-year-old French citizen, and here is my question for you today. So, has the President Macron failed in his promise to deliver democracy for France? And what could be the outcome of this failure? Thank you.
Thanks you very much, Mehdi. The snap election that President Macron called in June and July this year failed to deliver a majority for any party. The biggest bloc is on the left, but the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are drawn from the right. Fabrice Leggeri from the National Rally Party. Has President Macron failed in his promise to deliver democracy?
Yes, I think President Macron failed because there is no democracy anymore in France, because the National Rally Rassemblement National is the biggest group in the National Assembly. Other political parties have formed groups, but as a single party, we are the biggest one with more than 120 seats. So we should normally be at least in charge of a coalition, or let's say that our voices, the voices of our 11 million French voters should be better heard. But this is obviously not what President Macron did.
Danielle Obono from France Unbowed, the left-wing group in the Assembly. Has President Macron failed in his promise?
Yes, of course. Not only did he fail, but he actually made a coup against democracy. Because let me clarify for people listening, contrary to what has been said before me, we, the New Popular Front, were voted by the French citizen in order to rule the country. We were the first coalition that came out of the election. And what Emmanuel Macron did is just to deny the people, the government they should have had. We should have been the New Popular Front government led by Lucie Costet. So it's a coup. And I think this won't hold for long, because the government he put together, that he asked the far right, the National Front, approval of, and Marine Le Pen approved this government, won't stand for long, because it's a mismatch. It's a government of losers, and they really don't have a coherence. So this is not the way to rule a country like France. And I think the people will remember, and Macron will pay for that in the next elections.
Thanks very much, Danielle. Florence Fauchet from Sciences Po University. The question about a failure of democracy. Is that how you see what came out of the elections?
Well, no, or rather yes and no. It's an interesting situation in which the president decided very surprisingly to dissolve parliament just after European elections, and President Macron was also challenged by the Rassemblement National in particular to take into account the results, the outcome of this election, and very surprisingly, he followed suit. And it's very much in line with his idea that he should be disruptive of politics. And what he has done is that he has been quite disruptive. So has he fulfilled democracy? Yes, because he has given them an opportunity to vote. One of the consequences was that it revealed or demonstrated once more that the French political scene is very disrupted, very divided at the moment. But politically, he was actually in a way defeated because he failed. I mean, he was caught by the capacity of the left to organize and to win a quite surprising victory and to mobilize very widely voters.
Okay, thank you very much, Florence. I want to hear from the woman who is in President Macron's party, Eleonore Carrois. Criticism from the right, from the left, even from Florence Fauché from Sciences Po of what President Macron has done and about the democratic outcomes.
Well, that, in my word, is a sign of a healthy democracy. There's free speech. There are different ideas that are being represented. There are different groups in the National Assembly. We haven't had such a divided, but this means plural National Assembly in years. And the way the question is framed is interesting. Has the president been able to deliver democracy? Well, the truth is, our institutions are working. These NAPS elections were a surprise to everyone, but the fact of the matter is French people voted. And it strikes me to listen to the far right say, we have 11 million voters. We're talking about a country of 68 million inhabitants, and we should be ruling the country. It strikes me to hear a coalition on the left that has been short of 100 seats to have a majority in the National Assembly say, we should be ruling. Well, the truth of the matter is, we do not have an absolute majority. We're not used to that. You know, we're a very black or white, yes or no kind of country where you're either in power or not in power, in the majority or in the opposition. We are transitioning from a form of parliamentarism, which I think is healthy. And, you know, I represent the French diaspora that lives abroad, that lives in Latin America. And they happen to live in a country where you do not have democratic institutions. What you have to remind the audience right now is that everything was constitutional. The elections happened properly. People voted, they were mobilized. And what we have now is the result of the French people's desire to have a plurality of parties. And now it is our duty as, you know, representatives to be up to their desire to have a very diverse and representative assembly and hence political parties.
It is a curiosity, to say the least, that the single party that got the most votes, that's the Rassemblement National, is unrepresented in the government. The bloc, the coalition that has the most seats, is unrepresented in the government. It doesn't feel, at first sight, terribly democratic.
Well, there were discussions with every single political formation. And what you need to have is, if you don't have a majority, an absolute majority that allows you to form a government on your own, is the capacity to find allies. Well, what happened is the left, and they were offered the possibility to be part of the government. They said, it is our way or the highway. That's not a real good starting point. And the truth is, we have something that no one was expecting. If you'd asked me 2 months ago, because this government is only 2 months old, that if we would have had a prime minister coming from the right, I would have said, no, that wasn't what was expected. But we have oppositions that have very strong politicians, posters because they're thinking of the next move. They're thinking of the next election.
Okay.
And I heard my two colleagues mention the next elections. That's all they care about. And that's why they can't really be in a coalition as you would have in other countries.
Let us go back to our questioner, Mehdi. You asked the question about a failure to deliver democracy. Is that how you feel, Mehdi?
Macron hasn't revived democracy in France. I would rather think he has brought it to his knees and gave him a fatal blow. I don't understand, Eleanor, could you explain me maybe how the new government has not even one member of the New Popular Front, whereas the New Popular Front had the majority in the National Assembly?
That's a really fair question, Mehdi. And the question should be asked to them. They were offered the possibility to be part of the government, and had they been capable, yes, of course they were, and had they been capable of finding allies, they would have the prime minister right now.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you. And Mehdi, thank you very much for your question, the first question of our programme. Let's move on. We're going to hear from Justin.
Hi, sorry. So my question is, recent polls show that cost of living is at the top of French people's concerns. So what are some reasonable solutions that could address this crisis in France, and reasonable solutions that don't rely on anti-immigrant, often racist rhetoric?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Recent polls, the question of the cost of living and inflation is at the top of French people's priorities. What are some reasonable solutions? That cost of living crisis has bitten across the world. In France, food inflation, price rises, peaked at 15% in 2023. Energy inflation peaked at 33%, and 14% of French citizens now live in poverty. Danielle Abono, what are reasonable solutions? That's the line from Justin, to help with the cost of living crisis.
I think it's not so much about reasonable, according to who, but it's about what the people need is to live. It's to be able to pay rent. It's to be able to feed the kids. Over the past 10 years, the number of billionaires in our country increased from 60 to over 100. We have billions that the biggest corporations in this country earned in super profits, and they gave back in dividends. So there is the money for the people to live a decent life. So we propose to raise the minimum wage and to index the wages to the rate of inflation. We think we should cap the price of energy, food, and essential goods, and also make sure that people have enough of money to live.
So generous subsidies and tax rises to pay for them. Danielle, thank you very much indeed. Eleanor Carrois from the centrist Renaissance Party. The cost of living, some reasonable solutions.
I like your question. I like the fact that you ask for reasonable solutions, because we all need to be reasonable. When you listen to the debate, you have this impression that there's some magic money waiting there to be spent and to be redistributed. I do believe we need to increase the salaries, but we also need to decrease the cost of work in France. Today, we are one of the countries that has the highest charges and taxes. Taxpayers pay the highest taxes of the OECD countries. And I think at some point you need to find fairness in that. Fairness means, of course, that people that have the capacity pay more taxes. And this is something that has been also voted and proposed by the government. But it also means that that we're competitive and that we can have an economy that is healthy.
At the moment, Eleanor, the proposed budget would see sharp tax rises and pretty sharp spending cuts as well. There's little in the way of help for people for the cost of living, is there?
Well, actually, the budget is now being discussed, and the first part of the budget was rejected by the National Assembly. So it's an ongoing discussion, and it is hard to see what will be there eventually. When I was elected 2 years ago, the first thing we did was to help people face the energy crisis that we were facing. So there's a lot of subsidies in this country. The question is, are these subsidies efficient? Is public spending efficient? I think we can do way better in that sense.
Eleonore, thank you very much indeed. Fabrice Leggeri from the National Rally Party. The question, reasonable solutions. And I know that your party has been extremely vocal about the cost of living and the challenges for ordinary French citizens.
Yeah, cost of living is one of the priority of our voters. So as emergency solutions and reasonable solutions, we advocate reducing VAT, so reducing taxes on some basic goods, in particular food, for example. But we also advocate reducing taxes on energy, electricity, and as a midterm solution, France should get out of the European electricity pricing, which means that we should stop funding at European level the most expensive energies, and because the victims are the consumers. Midterm solution, in our views, is to reduce the prices of electricity. Nuclear electricity is the cheapest one, and we want to develop again and get rid of the green and the nuclear bashing that has been disseminated by some left-wing party, but also by President Macron during the recent debates in the last weeks in France, in the National Assembly. Rassemblement National was the only political party that proposed an alternative and cutting spending, but also increasing revenues. For example, we propose to reduce some public spending, that are in fact lost in fraud, social fraud. For example, the contribution made by the European by French citizens to the European Union has to be reduced. This is what other big member states have done. So there are many options, but in particular, reducing frauds, modernizing public organization, public administration, because at local level, but also at state level, national level, now it's a big mess, and there are a lot of cuts, budget cuts.
Thank you, Fabrice. Justin, you asked the question: reasonable measures to help with the cost of living crisis. What do you make of what you heard?
It was very interesting to hear about that. I heard more of concrete measures on the center and the left, more of like vague promises. I heard social fraud. I just want to jump back on that, saying that currently Fabrice Leggeri's party is being investigated for embezzling money from
I'm not sure that's quite relevant to what Monsieur Leggeri was talking
about. We could
about.
cut costs that way, like that on the public spending.
Right.
Just stop them from embezzling money. The rest, I'd say, as well, like high taxes in France might be looked upon.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Justin, and thank you for your question and your thoughts. Let us go on to a question from Mathurin.
Hello, my name is Mathurin Gamichon, and my question is, what the good things that can happen in Europe in the next years?
What good things can happen in Europe in the coming years? Florence Fauchet, what good things can happen? Europeans seem very, very gloomy these days.
Lots of good things should happen from the EU side. We know in a very uncertain world that we are now in, that bringing European countries together is the best way for them to play a substantive and an important role in the world. We have seen from Brexit how the decision to leave the European Union has actually left the UK more divided and more fragile economically. The position that are likely to be taken by President Trump involve probably weakening the support that Europe has received in terms of defense, but also increasing or creating a kind of commercial tensions or trade tensions. The solution for Europeans, for different individual nations, is clearly to work together. Very important decisions that need to be taken and pursued on climate change and environmental policy. So a lot of good things should happen. That doesn't mean that they will happen.
Florence Fauché from the Sciences Po University. Thank you very much indeed. Eleanor Carrois from the centrist Renaissance Party. What good things can happen in Europe in the coming years?
We are in a very critical situation. As you said before, Trump's election has been an awakening for European countries. We knew this. I mean, we had 2016, right? But it's a new phase, a more scary phase in a way, because we see the protectionism that comes from the other side of the Atlantic. And European countries need to work together. They need to work together under defense, where we have a war in Ukraine that is going on, that has been going on for 2 years. And there is this absolute need to coordinate our efforts to have a real possibility to defend ourselves alone, not only counting on our allies. There's also the climate topic, which Europe has been very involved in, and 30% of European budget is to be dedicated to fight against climate change, protection of biodiversity. So I think there has been a lot of good news recently. And my last word would be about governance. Before, it was all about the couple, Germany and France. As you have seen in France and in Germany, there is a bit of political instability. And I think it's important and actually a good thing that other countries, such as Poland, or countries that were not in the middle, at the heart of the European construction, are starting to take a lead as well. And that is also part of what we want as Europeans. We want to have different voices expressing themselves and working together.
Thank you very much indeed. Fabrice Leggeri from the National Rally Party. For a long time, your party was seen, perhaps unfairly, as hostile to the European Union, hostile to the idea of more integration. The previous two speakers say the way that good things will come from Europe is through more Europe, through countries working closer together. What do you think?
Well, we say, and our leader, Jordan Bardella, said after Trump's election that, of course, this new situation is a challenge, and that as Europeans, we should dare to say European interest first. We say that, in fact, we need a different Europe. And this is exactly the reason why we are now very active in the European Parliament. Because we know that as we have a very big delegation, so the French Rassemblement National is the biggest national delegation in the European Parliament. Our political group, the Patriots for Europe, is the third largest group in the European Parliament. And we can see that we have a weight and we can influence decisions. And so we want a different Europe. We want to transform the way the European Union makes decision. Governments, national governments and EU institutions should dare to say, first, we should serve our own interest. And this is exactly what Trump is doing with the American interest. We should dare to say, let's be assertive. For example, if there are trade tensions, so then we should also protect our market. If it's about defense, then we should say there should be a preference to purchase European weapons.
Thank you very much indeed. Daniela Bono from the left-wing France Unbowed. The question, what good things can happen in Europe in the coming years?
Many things need to happen in Europe. And I think it can happen if the people of Europe get together and mobilize for this and push the government in order for this to happen. I would focus on two issues. The first is climate change. We've seen what has been happening in Spain over the past weeks, and how it means that when government don't plan ahead, what we know is gonna to happen more and more, and is already happening in France. And so we need to focus our resources into planning to adapt our societies. The problem is, especially after the European elections and the fact that the right and the far right had gained a lot of seats, and they are anti-climates. So it means that we had to push, and
Fabrice is shaking his head. He's saying, no, that's not true.
We need to, if I may finish that.
Please,
so
forgive me.
we'll need the involvement of the ordinary people, working class people, the youth who has been so instrumental into putting those issues into the political agenda, to push the governments to act rather than talk, and all the blah blah that has been happening. And we see what's happening in Spain right now. The people are angry, rightfully so.
Thank you very much indeed. We will move on to our next question. It comes from Pierre.
Hello, my name is Pierre, and my question is, do you think that the violent police crackdown was a good solution after the murder of a 17-year-old Nael Merzouk by a policeman?
That question, do you think the violent police crackdown was a good solution after the, he says, murder, I would say killing, of 17-year-old Nael Merzouk by a policeman? Nael was a 17-year-old man of Algerian descent. He was shot and killed at a traffic stop. A week of rioting followed. 2 people were killed. There were conflagrations in more than 600 cities and towns. 2,500 buildings were damaged. €1 billion, $1 billion of damage in all. Daniela Bono, do you think that the response to the disturbances was the right one?
No, I don't think anyone should die because of a traffic stop a situation. Nobody should die. And this young man, this young French man, shouldn't have been killed. And not only that, that's the first point. And that's why people went onto the street and demonstrated and asked for justice. Not only for Nael, but for all the young black and brown French men that got killed over the years in similar circumstances, and cracking down on people who are asking for justice is no way a solution. There was no political answer to the situation, to the anger, the righteous anger that people felt after the death of Nael. There was nothing about the situation in which young men found themselves, about structural racism in our countries. Nothing, just police repression.
Okay, thank you very much. Fabrice Leggeri from the National Rally Party. You heard the question. Do you think a violent police crackdown was a good solution?
First of all, I would like to say that the police in a country like France has the right to enforce legislation and the rules, including with the use of force when this is proportionate and necessary. And this was obviously a case where this young man that was unfortunately killed, but the case is that this young man refused to stop the car. He endangered many lives, so he was speeding, he was driving fast, didn't stop at traffic lights and so on, and refused to stop the car. So that's the starting point of this police incident. And then I would like to say that President Macron made a political mistake, because President Macron said that this was not acceptable and could not be understood that the police shot the young man. So I would say on both sides, well, the young man didn't comply with the rules, but the president, unfortunately, made a political mistake because what he said was not appropriate.
Was the response to the demonstrations that then broke out, that led to so much damage and some deaths and many injuries, was the response by the police heavy-handed, or was it justified?
Well, I think that many French citizens and also foreigners living legally in France, they were scared by the riots. Because what happened were many riots in small cities where everybody thought that life was quiet and peaceful. I think that what French citizens, French voters want now is to enforce the law, to have a strong state protecting citizens, and honest citizens don't have to be afraid by the police. And that's our answer.
Thank you very much indeed. Eleanor Carrois from the President's Renaissance party, you heard what Fabrice Leggeri said. He said, essentially, the police were justified in what they did. The mistake was made by President Macron.
I'll say that I'm not surprised. Every single debate, and you would have noticed since the beginning of this show, it becomes a political, in the politician sense, debate. It's all about whose fault, and accusing France of not being a democracy. Well, you know what? We are in a democracy. We are under the rule of law. There is an investigation going on as to what happened and whether the police actions were disproportionate and whether there was a failure. And we actually have a service, an agency that is meant to control the actions of police here in France, and this works. We need to have laws that are applied, and the police is doing their job in applying it. And when they're not, we have tribunals and we have institutions. I think it is important to debate on that, and this is why we made several proposals to fight discriminations in the workplace, because it does exist, and saying that it doesn't is just trying to hide the sun with a finger. But trying to use it as a justification for people that are breaking the law, trying to victimize them and polarize the debate, as you see in some of the left banks of our assembly, or on the contrary, what the far right does is to say, well, migrants are responsible for everything, they're the cause of all of your problems, is really not up to the level of what French people are expecting. But yes, to your question, there is racism in France, as there is throughout Europe and throughout the world, and it is our role as politicians to address it and to respond efficiently to it, not with slogans and demonstrations, but with real proposals that will change people's lives.
Florence Fauché from the Sciences Po University. The question was about the police crackdown, whether it was a good solution after the killing of Nahal.
I think the question is very interestingly phrased. Some of the responses or some of the policing strategies that have been deployed in recent years have been seen for many, many years as unfair by some of the local communities, in particular by the youth, in particular in those who are racialized. We have to remember that this is not new. I think what it shows is the need to reflect on policing, probably in France, and on some of their ability to actually perform community policing. We have also to remember that the attitudes of French people beyond these neighborhoods can be quite different, and there is support for the police forces, as has been expressed by the previous orators.
Let's go on to Evelyn in Nice.
I'm French, but I've lived a lot abroad, and actually I'm a bit upset to see how the different parties are unable to stand together to resolve our problems when other countries can do it, in Europe, by example. So my question is, when are you going to work together, guys, instead of screaming to each other in the assembly, and hiding the interest of the nation behind your own ego?
Some hard words there from Evelyn. When are you going to work together instead of screaming at each other and hiding the interest of the nation behind your own ego? I'm not sure you'll agree that that's the situation that you'll face. Fabrice Leggeri from National Rally Party.
Yes, the Rassemblement National is not the one who is screaming in the French National Assembly. We want to cooperate, and if other political parties propose what we consider good solutions for French citizens, we are ready to support them and vote for them. But the problem is that other political parties wanted to exclude us. And part of the situation we have right now, since the election in June, July, is because President Macron and the left, the New Popular Front, they wanted to exclude Rassemblement National. They wanted to exclude the first political party in France, and they were not able to support the same policy. So this is where we are. But we are not screaming. We are reasonable, and we want to deliver a better French society for French citizens.
Thanks, Fabrice. Eleonore Carrois from Renaissance, from the centrist Renaissance Party. When are you going to work together instead of screaming at each other is the question.
I understand your question, Evelyn, and I understand where it comes from. And it's true that it can be a bit despairing to see what is happening and how the parties cannot get together. They're looking at the next elections. They're perceiving, hoping perhaps in the case of the National Rally, that there will be a new dissolution. And all they're doing is doing, very low politician speeches instead of trying to find solutions. We, on the contrary, we're sitting now with the right, which was our opponents during the elections, which we don't agree with them on many, many things, and we're trying to find compromises. But I do hope that the left will come along, that the left will stop being in a posture, so to speak, and that we will manage to find good solutions for the country, including them. But this is not the position they have right now, and yes, they are screaming.
Well, Eleanor, thank you very much, criticising the left in particular. And here is Daniela Bono from France Unbowed, from the left-wing party. When are you going to work together with the other parties?
I think it needs to be said that there are many instances where we actually work together. The most recent one was about the abortion rights. We made a proposal and we managed to agree with Macron's party and to make it into the constitution. So there are issues that we can agree on. Yet we also have to be honest about the thing we disagree. I disagree with the bill that was passed thanks to the agreement between Macron and Le Pen on immigrant rights, targeting immigrants. I disagree with that, and I can't work with them on that. I disagree with the choice that was made during the debate on the budget to tax more middle class and working class people rather than the wealthiest in this country.
I want to hear from Florence Fauchet from University of Sciences Po, first of all, that it was said when this assembly was elected that France was rather bad at forming coalitions and coming to agreements like this. Does France have a problem?
Well, France has a problem, or rather France has a different tradition relative to the formation of coalition. In countries that have proportional representation and that do form coalitions, such as Germany, for instance, but a number of other countries, the coalitions are formed after the election, when the parties have established their weight and can discuss issue by issue, and it can take a very long time before a government can be created. Now, what we've seen this year is that in France, as in the past, the coalition was signed before the election, and that has solidified the contractual relationship, in particular on the left. Now, the campaign also exacerbated some of the problems of the French political tradition and party competition tradition, which is that one doesn't really talk across divides. So we are left with a tripartite, three blocks in a sense, that cannot talk to each other, and they are of roughly equal weight. That clearly creates a situation that is very, very difficult to deal with.
Do you think the government will survive?
I think the government will survive probably at least 1 year, and the the National Assembly cannot be dissolved until next spring.
I'm going to end this by going back to our questioner, Evelyn. You talk about politicians screaming at each other, hiding the interests of the nation behind their ego. Do you feel let down by the politicians that you have? Do you think there is another better way?
Well, I think there is a better way. I mean, other countries, can work together. It takes a while. It takes an effort. It takes politeness also. Like, when you speak, I think we have lost, the way of talking politely, like in the National Assembly. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about someone who is president, why don't we say Monsieur Macron instead of saying Macron? Or we talk about Madame Le Pen, but not Le Pen, like if they were, bad people. No, they are people giving their life for the country, I think we have lost our sense of politeness in this country, and people were screaming at the assembly. I've never seen something like that before. And I think our politicians, they should work together. We have a debt, a colossal debt that we have to find solutions. We have to reduce expenses. And all the French people, they want to do their part, you know. I am a retired, I have a little pension, but I'm ready to do an effort, you know. And I think politicians, they have to do an effort to reduce the debt, talk to each other, and find a solution.
That's it for BBC World Questions France. A huge thank you to all of our panel and also to everyone who sent in questions. I'm Johnny Diamond. Until next time.